Sometimes you can tell when something in the air isn't quite right before a single word is spoken. There's a weight, a strange pressure, like standing under the clouds of a storm you can't yet see but can already feel crawling down your spine. Some describe it as intuition, others as paranoia. But whatever it is, I've known that sensation my entire life. It often comes before moments I wish I could forget, and it rarely steers me wrong. Quick reminder, most of you aren't subscribed. If you enjoy this, hit subscribe and like now, then let's get back to the story. I felt it the instant I stepped off the porch and crossed the threshold into my parents' home, an elegant stone-front residence in Brookhaven just outside Atlanta. I'm Dr. Lena Marlowe, 34 years old, a physical therapist by training and founder of Marlowe Athletic Recovery, a clinic that has consumed the last decade of my life. The foyer smelled of lemon polish and baked bread, too inviting to be casual, too carefully arranged to be natural. Something orchestrated was happening here. It was in my mother's overly bright smile. Bianca Marlowe, age 60, perfectly coiffed and always conveniently brimming with energy when she wanted something from me. It was in my father's handshake. Victor Marlowe, 62, a retired finance broker who still speaks as though every exchange at the dinner table is a negotiation. And it was in the restless eyes of my younger sister Chelsea, 29 years old, her body vibrating with the kind of nervous triumph you only see on gamblers holding a hand they're convinced will win. They wanted something from me. And they had rehearsed it. "Lena, honey, so glad you came," my mother crooned, taking my camel coat before I could shrug fully out of it. Her hand lingered at my back as she guided me toward the dining room, the touch firm and unyielding like she was ushering me toward a stage. My father trailed behind us, adjusting the cuffs of his pressed white shirt. Chelsea, all but skipping, drifted around my side, her perfume overly heady, her grin wounding with its sharpness. The dining room was staged like an advertisement for generational success. My mother had pulled out her best china, the gold-rimmed porcelain none of us had eaten from since her parents' 40th wedding anniversary. The crystal goblets glinted with candlelight. Awaiting an expensive wine, I was certain my father had decanted precisely 20 minutes before I arrived. At the center of the table, a towering vase of orchids and hydrangeas dominated the room in perfumed splendor. It was beautiful, yes, but it screamed false festivity. I took my usual seat across from Chelsea, meeting her gaze, and the beams of her smile nearly blinded me. This wasn't sisterly warmth. This was triumph waiting to be revealed. The food was my mother's classic display of what family was supposed to look like. Roast lamb sliced in symmetrical perfection by my father with his practiced hand. Creamy potatoes whipped to velvet. Seasonal green beans glistening with butter. And of course, her famous rosemary rolls, which she only baked when she wanted to soften me before a request. It might have been comforting, might have settled into nostalgia, except for the thin rectangle of beige manila I noticed tucked discreetly by my father's plate, its corner barely visible beneath his folded napkin. A folder, crisp-edged, official. My stomach tightened as though I had swallowed stones. "How's the sports therapy clinic?" my mother asked, her tone almost effervescent in its forced brightness, as if conversation itself were part of the choreography. "Still working those insane hours?" "Business is steady," I said lightly, though I could feel every tendon in my body coil at the subtle flick of my father's eyes toward the hidden folder. I kept my gaze steady, my voice measured. "Patient intake has grown more than 20% this quarter." Chelsea let out a soft snort, swirling water in her glass. 20% growth in that tiny waiting room? Someone clearly hasn't thought about space management. Imagine what you could accomplish if someone reorganized all that paperwork for you. Her voice dripped mock concern, but her smirk betrayed the punchline she couldn't wait to deliver. The puzzle clinked together in my mind like glass splinters aligning into a cruel design. My body stiffened even as I forced another bite of roll into my mouth. I already knew what was coming, though I still dreaded the moment they would finally lay their cards, and that ugly folder on the table. My father cleared his throat, the deep baritone cutting across the clinking silverware. He set his fork down with exaggerated precision, and the metallic echo jarred through me like a bell struck too hard. His gaze settled on me with all the gravity of a judge. "Lena, your mother and I have been discussing the long-term future of your clinic." The lamb turned to fibers of sand in my throat. I swallowed, words momentarily choking me before I forced a neutral expression over my face. My mother picked up the line as if they had choreographed the routine in their bathroom mirror. "Darling, family business needs family management. We only want to ensure your hard work lasts through the generations." I set my knife down carefully. "It's not a family business," I said. "I founded it. I built every component myself." "With our support," my father countered smoothly, already reaching for the folder. His ring caught the candlelight as he pulled it forward with a self-assured flourish. "And now Chelsea has prepared something extraordinary. A proposal that will make things easier for everyone." Chelsea straightened in her chair, her entire body vibrating with rehearsed pride. She slid her glossy hair over her shoulder, leaned forward, and announced, "I've drafted a strategic plan to become your practice manager. I'd oversee scheduling, insurance filings, your branding, everything. That way you could stay focused on patients without drowning in the boring details." She flashed her teeth in a triumphant smile that chilled me more than any storm. "All I'd need in return is a 25% share of profits, which is, honestly, beyond reasonable considering all the growth I'll bring." The room tilted slightly as my pulse thundered in my ears. Sunday dinner had always carried a heavy weight in this house. But this wasn't a gathering. It was an ambush, carefully set to corner me in the place where their power had always reached the deepest. The bitter taste of ramen and exhaustion filled my mouth, memories rising unbidden like ghosts unspooling from shadows. 14-hour clinical shifts through physical therapy school. Double shifts bussing restaurant tables and serving coffee to help cover tuition. Skipping meals to send money home when Chelsea just couldn't handle her freshman year expenses. The cramped studio apartment I occupied alone, the sagging thrift store mattress, the relentless $212,000 of student debt that still stalks my every paycheck. Not one step of that battle had belonged to them. Not one sacrifice had been theirs, yet here they sat, presuming ownership over the life I had carved, bare-handed from stone. I inhaled slowly, forcing stillness into my hand as I reached for my water glass. "I already have a clinic manager," I said, the icy steadiness of my words surprising even me. My mother waved her hand, an airy gesture dismissing my entire reality. "But Chelsea has the charm. Remember how she had Dr. Whitfield charmed at your clinic opening? He couldn't take his eyes off her all evening," I remembered. I remembered how my father positioned Chelsea at my shoulder in every photograph, snapping twice as many pictures of her in my robe and mortarboard at my doctoral graduation. I remembered her help at the front desk last summer, how her friends suddenly discovered they deserved free sessions, canceled appointments, or walked away with untraceable discounts. I remembered staying until midnight, unraveling the chaos she left behind. I set my glass down gently, the hollow clink sounding like a countdown to detonation. "May I see your plan?" I asked flatly, motioning to the folder my father had proudly pulled forth. A satisfied smile played across his lips as he slid it toward me. "It's already been drawn up with our attorney." "We only need your signature." Chelsea clasped her hands together, her voice pitching falsely sweet. "I can start tomorrow. I was even thinking of redecorating to make your lobby more elegant." Thunder cracked in my veins. Slowly, purposefully, I placed my napkin on my lap, then reached down beside my chair. My fingers brushed against my own case, leather, polished, weighty. My portfolio, my weapon. Before they could press further, I clicked the brass latch open. The sound cut the air like a gunshot, sharp enough to make my father's confident smile twitch at the corners. "Before we discuss anything," I said, sliding the portfolio onto the pristine tablecloth, "there's something you need to see." My father's hand froze, suspended above his plate. The smile that had carried him through decades of brokerage deals faltered just enough for me to notice the tremor behind his eyes. My mother's perfectly painted lips pressed together in a thin line of uncertainty, her palm fidgeting with the corner of her napkin. And Chelsea's triumphant grin collapsed, her eager poise sagging into something rawer, uglier. I slid the sleek leather portfolio onto the gleaming tablecloth, my movements deliberate, precise. The brass clasps gleamed like gold teeth under the chandelier's glow, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. Dinner had ceased being their production. The stage was mine now. My father cleared his throat in an attempt to reclaim control. His baritone cracked slightly, almost imperceptibly, but I heard it like a fissure breaking through granite. "What is this, Lena?" I leaned forward, unbuckling the portfolio with a click that seemed to echo louder than their rehearsed argument about family legacy. "A reminder," I said softly, letting the leather applaud open as though unveiling a weapon, "that my business belongs entirely to me, and that I've already secured its future." Their eyes darted toward the packet of documents I withdrew, page corners aligned with the neatness born from years of exhaustion and precision. The top sheet bore the blue and silver insignia of a corporate medical management firm. 3 weeks ago, I said, sliding the stack to the precise center of the table, I signed a comprehensive management agreement with Hartwell Health Systems. They will oversee all administrative aspects of Marlowe athletic recovery, billing, scheduling, contracts, in exchange for a modest service share. That means effective immediately. I don't require family involvement. Or approval. The words left my mouth like polished stones, heavy and smooth. My father's jaw spasmed. My mother's knuckles clenched white around her water glass. Chelsea's sharp inhale was audible in the still room. You can't make decisions like this, my father stammered, his voice carrying the disbelief of a man unaccustomed to power being stripped from him. Not without consulting family, I finished, my lips curving slightly. Actually, I can. Section 4.3 of this agreement explicitly prohibits family members from holding management roles without unanimous board consent. The board, for clarity, consists of myself and 2 Hartwell executives, neither of whom, I tapped the document gently, have any interest in nepotism. Chelsea flushed crimson, her chair creaking as she leaned forward. You did this on purpose, to shut me out. I made a business decision, I countered, lifting another folder from my case. And a wise one. Based on past evidence, her eyes narrowed into panicked slits as I slid the thick file closer. Her file, the one I had chosen to prepare in the event this exact ambush came to pass. Complaint forms, scheduling logs, printed screenshots, all meticulously sorted. Each mistake dated and signed like a scar carved into record. These are from last summer, when you worked the front desk, I said evenly. Let's count 15 double bookings, 23 unauthorized discounts, 8 of them given to your sorority sisters, 31 billing errors, half of which nearly triggered an audit. No one's perfect, she shot back, her voice pitching higher now. I was just helping out. Helping? I flipped the folder closed with surgical sharpness. These weren't innocent errors. They were proof of carelessness from someone who assumed the rules didn't apply to her. My mother's hand hovered across the table, shaking faintly before retreating. Her eyes watered in manufactured woundedness. Sweetheart, everyone makes mistakes at first. These, I said, my voice cutting clean across hers, were not learning mistakes. They were choices. Chelsea's mouth opened, but I didn't give her the stage. I drew from the portfolio again, presenting an itemized accounting ledger compiled by my bookkeeper. This, I announced, tapping the column of numbers, calculates the value of the free treatment packages, consultations, and therapies I've provided this family over the last 3 years. Dad, your rotator cuff therapy sessions? Mom, your recurrent plantar fasciitis program. Chelsea's massages before her spring vacations. Sum total, $42,715. Gratis. Paid for by the same clinic you're now scheming to siphon 25% from. For the first time that evening, silence felt heavy enough to feel tangible. It was a silence that pressed against eardrums, that bent the air like heat over asphalt. My mother's fingers slipped helplessly from her napkin. Chelsea's hand tightened around her wine glass until it threatened to crack. My father stared at the sheet as though it were written in a language he couldn't read. Meanwhile, I, for once in my life at this table, sat taller, while they exchanged desperate glances. I took a measured sip of water, savoring the steadiness of my own breath. Something inside me, something heavy I had carried for years, seemed to fracture and lift. The girl who once begged them for approval was gone. The woman at the table had no reason to shrink. Finally, my father leaned forward, desperation leaking through the cracks of his cultivated authority. We can negotiate. Give Chelsea 20%. A trial period, perhaps. The words burned my ears like acid, yet instead of pain, they sparked calm. I closed the portfolio with a snap that cracked the tension like a whip. This clinic, I said, enunciating each syllable as though laying down scripture, is not your bargaining chip. It's not your retirement plan. It is not Chelsea's shortcut to relevance. It is my career, my labor, my life. My mother placed a trembling hand against her throat, her favorite gesture of martyrdom. I never thought I'd see the day you'd put business before family, she whispered, voice quivering for effect. I smiled, a thin smile that carried steel. I'm not putting business before family. I'm putting boundaries before exploitation. Chelsea's chair screeched against hardwood as she shoved back from the table, her voice rising into a shrill pitch. You've always been this way, acting like you built everything yourself, like you owe us nothing, when we've always supported you. Supported me? I arched a brow, the words sharp enough to draw blood. When? Was it during my doctoral graduation, when Dad photographed you in my robe instead of me with my diploma? Or maybe when Mom introduced me as just the medical technician at my own clinic opening gala? Or was it my 12th birthday when I got a card and you got a bicycle? My valedictorian speech, when neither of you showed because Chelsea had a cold? You've supported me only in the moments when it served your image, never when it mattered. The silence that followed was deafening. I rose slowly, each movement precise, controlled. My father stood too, perhaps instinctively, though his presence loomed smaller than it had ever seemed in my life. "You've changed, Lena," he muttered darkly. "Success has made you hard and cold." "No," I said firmly, my eyes locking with his. "Success has made me visible, and you never knew what to do with a daughter you couldn't ignore." A tremor fluttered through his jaw. My mother lowered her gaze to her plate. Chelsea looked as though she might sob or launch herself across the table. I slid my documents back into my portfolio and latched it closed. The leather felt lighter against my hand than the entire weight of my history with this family. I straightened, adjusted the strap across my shoulder, and turned toward the hallway. "Oh, one last thing," I added, pausing at the doorway. "Effective next month, your treatments will be billed at standard patient rates. Our community charity program is for those truly in need, not those who simply prefer not to pay." Behind me, breaths caught. My mother gasped. My father's curse hissed under his teeth. My sister's sharp intake dissolved into the beginnings of a theatrical cry. But for once, for the very first time, none of their reactions pulled me back into the gravitational center of appeasement. I walked through the threshold and into the night air, the chill wrapping around me not with malice but with clarity. Outside, my phone buzzed. A simple text from my clinic manager, Ellie. "Did you tell them yet? We're all here for you." I exhaled under the quiet expanse of stars, at last believing the words. That night, alone in my apartment, silence hummed like static against the walls. It wasn't the kind of silence that comforts, but the kind that reminds you every sound of your past still shadows you when the world grows still. I sat with my portfolio on the table in front of me, its brass corners polished by years of grim use. I didn't open it. Didn't need to. The papers inside were no longer weapons waiting to be unsheathed. They had already been fired. Instead, memories returned the way they always do when I allow myself to exhale after battle. They unspool like old film reels, grainy and edged with bitterness, yet sharp enough to cut. My 12th birthday fell on a Tuesday in early spring, unremarkable except for the math test I nailed that morning. I came home to find a single greeting card propped awkwardly against my cereal bowl. The handwriting rushed. The signatures absent-minded. The kind of gesture tossed off like buying a lottery scratcher at the gas station. No cake, no balloons. No bike. I'd circled bikes in toy catalogs for 3 years straight, dog-eared pages, and left them accidentally on the kitchen counter in November. Then again in February, dropping hints with a patience that bordered on obsession. 2 weeks later, Chelsea turned 10, and when she woke up that morning, a gleaming lavender bicycle stood outside on the porch. Streamers fluttered off its handlebars, a wicker basket perched in front for collecting her trinkets. My parents clapped proudly as she wobbled in circles on the driveway, my father's hands steadying her back. My mother waving with a handkerchief as if sending a little princess down a parade route. "Lena, grab the camera," my father barked, tossing me his Nikon. "Make sure you get the moment right. This is a milestone. Click." I took the picture. Chelsea's grin bright, her hair shining with sunlight. My parents clapping, dotting on her as though enduring her learning wobble was miraculous enough to warrant celebration. Later that evening, as I dried plates while my mother washed, I asked carefully, "Remember when I got my first bike?" She paused, sponge hovering midair. "You were always such a practical child, Lena. You wanted books. Bikes weren't your thing." I didn't have the heart to tell her that what I wanted sat dog-eared in magazines she never read. High school brought more of the same. Achievements met not with family applause, but with polite absences. I was valedictorian. The gymnasium buzzed with families clutching bouquets of roses, balloons brushing the rafters, parents elbowing neighbors to snap photos of their scholar children at the podium. I delivered a carefully crafted speech to rows of beaming faces, searching for the one cluster of familiar eyes. They arrived 7 minutes after my words ended, sliding into seats in the back, whispering excuses of traffic was a nightmare. By then, I was back in the crowd, holding my folded speech while classmates were smothered with hugs and flowers. But they reminded me, "Don't forget, sweetie, Chelsea has her dance recital tonight. You'll be there, won't you?" College was no different. Acceptance letters with scholarships arrived thick in our mailbox, sealed in glossy envelopes. But my parents' excitement was reserved mostly for Chelsea's campus visits, for snapping pictures with her dorm posters and the sorority brochures she waved proudly. My dean's list certificates, often still unopened weeks later on the kitchen counter. By graduate school, pursuing my doctorate in physical therapy, I stopped waiting for crowds and cameras. I graduated, hooded in academic regalia, my honors cords bright against the dark robe. I stood alone after the ceremony, at first with a flutter of expectation. Maybe this time, they'd be here. They weren't. Until finally, a figure waved from across the quad. "Chelsea, wearing my mortarboard like a parade hat?" "There you are," she said brightly, not meeting the tears in my eyes. "Dad wants some pictures of me in this. You don't mind, do you?" For the next 20 minutes, I watched my father photograph her with meticulous pride, wearing the cap I'd bled 4 years to earn, adjusting angles, making her switch sides, capturing her against brick walls and flowering trees. Not one picture of me with my diploma case clutched in hand. Later, my father passed the cap back to me with the dismissiveness of slipping a bill across a counter. "Book smarts don't build practices, Lena." His gaze didn't meet mine. Remember that. When I finally struck out on my own, carving Marlowe athletic recovery from late nights and loans, the memories of those years followed me like dogs on chains. 20-hour work weeks stretched to 80, scrawling patient notes at midnight, collapsing over loan statements that burned numbers into my retinas. $212,000. That debt sat like an anchor dragging at every paycheck, every evening meal hastily eaten on the edge of a treatment table. Yet that clinic became my oxygen. Even when the bank manager looked across at me with polite pity, shaking his head at my lack of cosigner, reminding me that dreams weren't collateral. Even when my parents, in the very same month, bought Chelsea a new SUV to help with her job interviews, but wouldn't sign their name beside mine to secure the expansion loan. Even when nights ended with me curled under a thin blanket on the vinyl treatment tables, after 14 hours stacked with patients and insurance paperwork, the cleaning staff found me there some mornings, half asleep with spreadsheets still glowing on the laptop beside me. One janitor, kind-eyed and silent, once covered me with a heavier cleaning rag, as though acknowledging a truth neither of us could say aloud. I was surviving on exhaustion and defiance alone, and it was enough, piece by piece. The clinic opened, then grew. Clients trusted me. Referring physicians began calling. Insurance battles resolved because I refused to submit sloppy documentation. Every error I had seen Chelsea dismiss as boring, every detail my parents waved away as beneath attention, I mastered instead. And that became my power. Years later, when I stood beside the ribbon at my own clinic's opening ceremony, holding oversized scissors with trembling hands while my staff of 3 clapped behind me, I waited for them to show up. They did eventually, 15 minutes late, smiling politely between Chelsea's bridal shower and their dinner reservation. "It's nice," my mother said, glancing around briefly before tugging her coat tighter. "Looks like a real office." My father peered at my framed credentials, squinting. "Just remember, Lena, it's not about the degrees. It's the people that matter." Then they left before the champagne toast, missing the photograph that later ran in the local Dar Business Journal. I didn't cry that night. By then, I had already stopped believing in the idea that they'd ever see me for who I was. But resentment has its own form of hunger, and mine became fuel. So when Chelsea nearly tanked my clinic in one disastrous summer of unauthorized discounts, missed phone calls, and paperwork shoved into drawers, I gathered the wreckage and rebuilt until patients trusted us again. When referrals started to notice the things I did differently, when insurance reps began approving claim after claim because I hunted every error with obsessive precision, I realized something profound, what they dismissed as invisible. The careful work in the shadows, the grind between dawn and collapse, had become the very thing no one could take from me. And though my family never intended it, their neglect had forged me into someone who could build on her own, without their applause, without their protection. But now, under the glow of my apartment's solitary lamp, sitting at a table still scarred with scratches from move-in, the reality of that Sunday ambush weighed differently, not as another dismissal, not as another slight, rather as the dividing line between the old Lena, who stayed silent beneath years of invisibility, and the Lena who had finally set boundaries on her worth, For the first time, the silence around me felt less like static and more like peace. The days following that Sunday dinner blurred into motion, but something within me had shifted. For years, I'd moved through life waiting for the next ambush, the next slight, the next performance of support that never held any weight. But after walking out of my parents' house with my portfolio intact, the silence around me wasn't the oppressive echo of being unseen. It was clarity, liberating in its weightlessness. At Marlowe Athletic Recovery, the clinic hummed with a different kind of energy. My staff didn't just work, they believed. Ellie, my manager, ran the front office like it was both shield and lifeblood. Her clipped brunette bob framed a face equal parts warmth and discipline. When I'd first interviewed her, overqualified and skeptical after 30 years in hospital administration, she had squinted at me across the table. "You're too idealistic," she had said, folding her arms. "This sort of center doesn't survive long. Insurance companies devour small practices." "Then help me make it survive," I countered, my voice steadier than my racing pulse. "Stay for 1 year. If it folds, walk away." No hard feelings, she stayed. Not only that, when another hospital later offered her a higher salary, she tore up the letter and tossed it into her shred bin with a laugh. "They don't value people like you do, Lena. And people will build their lives here if you let them." She was right. Carlos, my lead physical therapist, exuded calm like the still depth of a river. His hands were steady enough to guide post-op athletes through delicate exercises, but strong enough to stabilize a trembling elderly patient through their first unassisted step. During the weeks Chelsea's carelessness had left us scrambling, I'd once found him at midnight surrounded by insurance forms, scribbling codes he shouldn't even have to know as the delivery driver dropped off a lukewarm pizza. "We've got this," he'd grinned at me, exhaustion gleaming in his eyes. "Your sisters, apparently." But here, we're a team. And then there were the newer hires. Meredith, just 24, fresh from grad school, her patience astonishing for someone so young. She'd sit for hours coaching a stroke patient through hand mobility, correcting each fraction of an inch with practiced encouragement. And Kayla, our receptionist, who built spreadsheets more intricate than I'd ever manage, fixing backlogs that had once nearly strangled us. What lived inside these walls wasn't family in the sense Victor and Bianca demanded. It was something better. A kind of chosen kinship, forged not by blood or obligation, but by collective sacrifice and the stubborn will to build something meaningful. When Fridays rolled around, our team gathered in the break room with mismatched mugs of coffee. Staff meetings in hospitals were often top-down. Someone in a suit dispensed orders no one wanted to hear. Not here. My rule was simple. Each voice mattered. Cleaning staff, interns, therapists, manager. Everyone spoke. Everyone shared one challenge from the week and one victory. However small, those meetings became sacred. Kayla might share how she finally sorted out an insurance counsel's glitch. Carlos might grin proudly about coaxing an orthopedic surgeon into sending us his trickiest case. A custodian might simply say, "The new mop heads work better," and every single one mattered. That's when I realized what Ellie had hinted at months before. The strength of our walls wasn't brick and drywall, it was belonging. Of course, growth wasn't handed down on a platter. It came in grueling stages. I'll never forget the afternoon a stern-faced woman from one of the largest insurers, Blue Horizon, sat across my desk. For weeks, they'd been rejecting our therapy claims under obscure technicalities, draining revenue down to threads. My eyes felt like sandpaper from 3 nights straight spent dissecting their coding manual. "Ms. Marlowe," the rep frowned, "your documentation simply doesn't meet our required standards." I slid a thick folder across to her. My hands didn't even tremble. It had become second nature. "Here's a protocol revision. Every treatment code has been cross-referenced against your latest guidelines. Corrections are noted and initialed. Patients impacted have been rescheduled and their files redocumented." Her sharpened eyebrows rose as she skimmed. This is unusually thorough. You did this yourself?" 3 weeks, I replied flatly. "Every night. Alone." The silence stretched, the weight of her recognition hanging heavy. For the first time, she nodded with respect. "That isn't common," she admitted. 3 days later, Blue Horizon approved not only our pending claims, but every backlog submission. Word began circulating. By the end of the quarter, referrals doubled. Our waiting list stretched weeks. The first month we turned a profit. After 2 agonizing years of scraping by, I sat in the darkened clinic, reviewing the numbers 3 times, scarcely able to believe them. It wasn't champagne cork worthy. I didn't share it with Victor or Bianca. didn't call Chelsea to brag. Instead, I walked to the lobby, flicked off the last light, and let the silence wrap around me with a warmth I had never known at the family dinner table. It occurred to me, in that moment, that invisibility had become my superpower. They never noticed my quiet persistence, never celebrated my buried labor, but invisibility allowed me to build foundations no one thought would stand. The walls they never paid to hold up stood tall on their own. Hartwell Health Systems, seeing our solid foundation, approached with admiration rather than avarice. They said, "We've been watching your outcomes data. Your patients recover faster. Your notes are clean. We're interested in formally partnering." That was the agreement I slid across my parents' dinner table. That was the hammer that turned their illusion of control to dust. Weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday, my office phone rang. On the other end was the medical director of Atlanta Orthopedic Center, her voice controlled, professional. "We've been watching your patient outcomes," she said, echoing Hartwell. "Your recovery rates surpass regional averages. I'd like to propose a partnership, sending you our complex shoulder cases. Exclusive." When I hung up the phone, I exhaled in disbelief. That night, the team stayed after hours, not to clean up Chelsea's mistakes, not to scramble through paperwork, but to celebrate. There were 9 of us by then, huddled around the break room table with store-bought sheet cake and paper plates. Ellie raised a plastic cup of cheap sparkling juice. "To Lena," she teased warmly, who saw possibility where everyone else saw impossibility. "And to this clinic, because no one here is invisible." The cheers that followed were louder than any applause my family had ever given me. After everyone left, I stayed behind. In the quiet, I reached for my original business license framed by the door. The seal shimmered faintly in the half-light. I pulled it down, cradled it in my hands. The next morning, we would rehang it in the new lobby, the bigger one, the one we had just renovated to triple our treatment space. For hours, I lingered in that room, not because I needed anyone to see, not because I hoped for recognition, but because in the quiet, I finally realized something profound, something new. I was no longer waiting to be acknowledged. I was building anyway, and the ground beneath me for the first time in my life was solid. The growth of Marlowe Athletic Recovery should have been enough to silence any doubts, not just my own, but theirs. Numbers don't lie. Contracts don't lie. The steadily climbing referrals, the waiting list stretching into months, the patient outcomes reflected in data and testimonials. They all spoke in a language even my father's business-trained ears should have respected. But if there is one thing I've learned about the Marlowes, it's that losing control doesn't breed humility. It breeds desperation. The first signs were subtle. Missed calls from my mother hour after hour, just to check in. Voicemails that started softly, "Sweetheart, haven't seen you in weeks. Are you eating?" But shifted always into veiled criticism. "You should consider adding services for seniors, dear. It could boost your bottom line. You know your father and I only want to see you thrive." Then came my father's attempted business outreach. He contacted my accountant directly, calling it a professional inquiry. I'd had the foresight to warn her in advance that under no circumstances should family members be granted entry into records. When she later emailed me about it, she included a note. Victor tried charm first, then intimidation. Eventually left when I mentioned harassment charges. Thought you might find that information useful? It would have been laughable, except it was exhausting. The boldest maneuver came from Chelsea. She appeared one Thursday afternoon during peak patient hours, glossy folder tucked under her arm. "All smiles for the waiting room. I'm here to pitch marketing ideas," she announced to Kayla at the front desk, loud enough for patients to overhear. "I'll just wait for my sister. We're practically partners after all." Mark, the young manager learning under Ellie's tutelage, reacted flawlessly. He offered her a seat, smiled politely, and immediately texted me. I didn't even leave the treatment floor. My patient, recovering from an ACL tear, didn't deserve to be abandoned mid-session. I guided his movement with steady hands, coaching him through resistance bands while Chelsea sat outside, fuming as the afternoon slipped away without her audience. She left after an hour, but not before loudly telling Kayla, "It's fine. I'll catch her later." We always do family business privately. The phrase rattled around like a wasp in my skull. Family business. As though my clinic were some generational empire she was entitled to by birthright. The charade didn't stop there. Less than 24 hours passed before Ellie appeared at my office door, holding her phone with an expression carefully schooled between professionalism and anger. "You should see this," she said flatly, sliding the screen across my desk. It was my mother's Facebook page. The image attached was one I hadn't looked at in years. Me at the original opening of Marlowe Athletic Recovery 3 years earlier, my mother smiling broadly, her arm looped around my shoulders. In the photograph, she looked proud, devoted, an optical illusion of support. Underneath, the caption read, "So proud of my daughter Lena's vision." Marlowe Athletic Recovery has always been a family business. We believed in her from the start, our pride and joy. A wave of nausea coiled in my stomach as I read it again. Family business. We believed in her. The comments were full of congratulations. Not for me, but for us. High school acquaintances praised my parents for raising such a driven woman. Old neighbors wrote about how inspiring it was to see the family come together for success. My jaw locked until it ached. I slid the phone back to Ellie, heart pounding. "The timing is no accident," she said, her tone matter of fact. They can feel the story slipping from their fingers. Public perception? That's the only leverage they have left. That same week, I received a message from Dr. Reynolds, a respected orthopedic surgeon who regularly referred complex cases. Slightly confused, he had written politely, "Victor approached me about a family partnership with your clinic." He implied equity stakes. "Just wanted clarity before we send 2 more rotator cuff referrals." My stomach sank. They weren't satisfied with illusion. They were trafficking lies directly into my professional network. By Friday, I'd drafted an email maybe 14 times. Each version more restrained than the last, each one edited to sound precise, calm, professional. Because fury was a luxury I couldn't afford where documentation mattered. To my family, as previously stated, all decisions regarding Marlowe Athletic Recovery are mine alone. The clinic does not employ family, nor does it permit familial claims of partial ownership. Any attempts to present otherwise to patients, professionals, or the community directly harm me, the staff, and my patients. To be perfectly clear, family relationships remain personal. Professional boundaries are absolute. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't emotional. It was surgical. But pressing send felt like cutting an artery. Ellie appeared not 30 minutes later with 2 coffees, her ritual for moments that required resilience. Placing one in my hand, she said gently, "If they're increasing public claims, they're running out of private ones." But the escalation wasn't over. A week later, Carol, one of our senior therapists, slipped a handwritten note across my desk. "Your mother stopped by during lunch," she murmured. "Said she just had to leave this for you." The envelope bore my name in Bianca's elegant cursive, careful loops and flourishes that suggested composure, even tenderness. Inside, the paper bore tear stains, though whether genuine or fabricated, I no longer trusted myself to tell. "My dearest daughter," it read, "family can't be defined by contracts or companies. We've made mistakes, yes, but surely there is space for healing. Please, come home for a family meeting. Just us. Let's mend this on our terms, on their terms. Always on theirs." I folded the letter neatly, dropped it in the drawer where I stored every prior attempt at manipulation, each carefully cataloged, dated, and preserved like exhibits in a case I never wanted but knew I needed to build. The very next day, a far more formal envelope arrived, this one embossed, couriered by post. My father's letter. "Lena," it began, "we would like to engage in family mediation, assisted by my attorney. This situation has clearly escalated beyond private resolution, and professional facilitation seems prudent." The audacity of it boiled my blood. And yet, reading it through, a fierce calm came over me. I understood something vital. Their frantic attempts to insert themselves into my story weren't fueled by care. They were fueled by panic. The narrative they'd spun for decades, that attention belonged to Chelsea, that I was the quiet one, the afterthought, the shadow. They could no longer enforce it. And that terrified them more than losing access to my clinic. That weekend, I kept a quiet appointment at a neutral cafe in town. Cornerstone, my choice, not theirs. Wide windows. Neutral ground. I brought my leather portfolio filled with every record, every screenshot, every unpaid loan to Chelsea, every line item of free treatments I had already given them. Armor pressed flat into paper. When they walked in, all dressed in matching tones like a united front at a courtroom, I didn't rise, didn't fidget, didn't shrink. "Lena," my mother cooed, bending as though to embrace me. I remained seated, forcing her to pat my shoulder awkwardly instead. My father spoke next, voice lowered like he was lecturing a subordinate. Family matters should not be paraded in public, Lena. You should have come home for this. This is not, I said sharply, gesturing to the papers before me, just a family matter. This involves my business, and my business does not exist to be your stage. Chelsea dragged her chair out noisily, the perfume cloud preceding her like a battle flag. Her manicured hands slapped a tablet onto the table. I've thought about last time, she began, attempting a gentler tone. I know I came on too strong. So here's a revised plan. Consulting, not managing. 3 days a week. I'll handle community outreach, branding, social media presence. In exchange for limited equity, of course. I sipped my coffee before answering. Calm, focused, steady. Before we discuss proposals, I said, let's clarify something. The Hendersons congratulated me at their anniversary party, said how inspiring it was to see our family business flourishing. They seemed shocked when I told them no Marlowe other than myself has ever been part of this clinic. Do you know why they thought otherwise? My father's jaw twitched. We never said. I reached down, sliding across another folder. Screenshots, printouts, social media posts from Bianca's page, texts referencing our project, emails between Victor and Dr. Reynolds about partnership potentials. The silence that followed stretched taut. Cups clinked at nearby tables. A child laughed across the cafe, but at our table, every sound was strangled at its birth. Finally, I looked directly at Chelsea. This ends now. Her eyes flashed, but in her hesitation I knew. The power dynamic was shifting permanently. The quiet in that cafe was deceptive. Ambient chatter swirled. Espresso machines hissed, chairs scraped softly across hardwood. But at our table, the stillness was a vice closing tighter with every second my family scrambled for control. The weight of my portfolio anchored the space between us. My documents sat like a visible reminder that while their words could be polished and rehearsed, mine were carved in ink and law. Chelsea recovered first. She leaned in, lips parting in a performance of wounded innocence. You've been watching us, she said, her voice low, tinged with both accusation and disbelief. As if you expected us to betray you. That's not family, Lena. I kept my gaze steady, fingers tapping the folder with a rhythm that matched the slow certainty of my heartbeat. No, I corrected. It's not that I expected betrayal. It's that you left me no choice but to prepare for it. Her nostrils flared. My father stepped in, the businessman mask sliding back into place. We're getting lost in semantics, Victor murmured, voice smooth as a closing argument before a jury. We all want the same thing here, Lena, your long-term stability. And for Chelsea to find her place. She already has a place, I replied, the edge in my tone cutting through his composure. But it isn't in my clinic. My mother Bianca let out a quick, trembling laugh, her hand sweeping delicately to brush imaginary crumbs from the table. You don't have to be so dramatic, darling. No one is trying to steal from you. We're only asking to share in what we've invested years supporting. Supporting? The word darted off my tongue like venom. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a scalpel's precision. Let me remind you, because somehow memory always serves Chelsea alone in this family. When I worked back-to-back shifts through graduate school to cover both tuition and clinic startup funds, where were you? When I begged for a cosigner for my expansion loan, you refused, but bought Chelsea a new SUV for her interviews. When I opened my clinic, you stayed for 15 minutes before rushing off to a dinner reservation. Support doesn't mean photographs with Chelsea in my graduation cap. It doesn't mean hijacking my achievements for your social posts. It means showing up. You never did. My mother's eyes shimmered, but it was the kind of glitter designed for pity, not honesty. She placed her hand flat against her chest. We raised you. Sacrificed for this family. I cut her off, voice quiet but sharp. And I repaid that debt. Every time you came in for treatment without opening your wallets, every student loan payment I starved to make while covering Chelsea's shortfalls. I repaid every sacrifice tenfold, and still you call it family business. Victor's jaw tightened. You talk like we don't matter. Like we don't deserve a stake in what you've become. The fury roared louder in my chest, but I spoke with ice. What you deserve is the truth. I slid another sheet across the table, a spreadsheet with neat columns, time-stamped, signed by my accountant. Here is the tally of financial support I extended to this family over 3 years. $42,715 in free treatments. Over $16,000 in loans to Chelsea, unpaid. Forgiveness of debts. Do not talk to me about what you deserve. Chelsea's voice sharpened, brittle with bitterness. You think that means you're better than us? That giving money buys you superiority? I shook my head slowly, almost pitying her. No, Chelsea, I don't think it makes me better. I think it makes me tired. She slammed her hand on the table, startling a couple at the next booth. This isn't fair. You get everything. The respect, the praise, the leadership role, the glowing reputation. You play the noble doctor while I get stuck in office jobs nobody cares about. For the first time, Victor and Bianca looked shocked, not at me, but at her. At the words that slipped past too quickly for her to polish. Raw resentment, naked and bitter. That's the truth then, isn't it? I said softly, eyes locked with hers. This was never about helping me. It was about siphoning what I built because you envied it. Her face flushed. And for once, no clever defense came. Victor slammed his fist lightly on the table. Not enough to draw attention, but enough to punctuate his dwindling authority. This is absurd, he growled. Success has made you arrogant, Lena. We were only trying to protect you from yourself. Because we never truly believed you could maintain this alone. That's reality, and there it was. The nail loosened, pulled free. The truth, blunt as a hammer. They had never believed. Not when I proved worthy, not when I survived their indifference, not when I achieved something on my own. My chest rose steadily, a new strength taking residence inside me. I stood. My movements calm, deliberate, unstoppable. The entire cafe faded around our table, chatter dimming, steam hissing softer as though the air itself knew what was coming. These are my terms, I said, my voice level and cold enough to frost glass. First, Marlowe Athletic Recovery is mine alone. Neither Chelsea, nor you, nor anyone with our last name will hold stake or have influence over it. Business decisions remain mine, exclusively. Second, all family treatments are billed at standard rates. No more free passes. And third, any claim you make publicly or privately tying yourselves as partners in my clinic ends today. Violate these boundaries and I will pursue legal avenues. Bianca's hand flew to her throat, her reflexive performance trembling her shoulders. You can't mean this. My own daughter. Family respects boundaries, I said firmly, my voice low enough to cut but not crack. Family celebrates without trying to claim ownership. If you can learn that, you can still be my family. If not, you won't be part of my life. Not personally, and certainly not professionally. The weight of the words landed heavier than all the contracts and ledgers between us. For once, Victor had no counter-argument. Bianca's tears finally looked real. Chelsea, though, her fists clenched, her nails digging into her palm, her bitterness spilling unchecked into the air. It's not fair, she whispered, venom laced with desperation. You think you've won, Lena, but you'll always be cold and alone without us. I looked at her, really looked, and instead of hurt, I felt clarity. No, I said gently, I'm not alone. I have my team, my patients, a community that trusts me. That's the difference between us, Chelsea. You only know how to demand. I know how to build. I closed my portfolio with a snap, dropped the exact change for my coffee onto the table, and walked toward the cafe doors. Their voices rose behind me, Bianca's weeping plea, Victor's harsh hiss, Chelsea's ragged sob, but this time I didn't turn back. For the first time in my life, I walked away without asking for permission. Outside, the sunlight cut through heavy gray clouds, crisp and warm against my face. The weight that had tethered me my whole life, the invisible leash that brought me circling back each time, snapped. I was free. A year passed after that morning at the cafe, though sometimes it felt longer, like lifetimes had unfolded between one slammed portfolio clasp and the next sunrise. Time doesn't always run in neat, ticking increments when you've chosen, finally, to sever a leash you'd worn since childhood. It runs in widening circles, expanding the distance between who you were and who you've become. Inside the clinic, growth had bloomed like spring through cracks in concrete. What had once been 3 treatment rooms now stretched to 15 in a sparkling new wing. The floors shone with fresh polish. Sunlit windows framed the Atlanta skyline. The reception area that once offered only 3 chairs now hosted a comfortable lounge, where patients sat peacefully beneath framed awards and community service plaques. Evidence, finally, of what we had built together. Not family business, just mine. Just ours. Where my parents had failed to provide roots, my staff became family in practice, and not in name. Meredith, Once the nervous 24-year-old repeating scripts in the mirror before patients arrived, was now confidently guiding stroke survivors and orthopedic cases with the steady patience of someone twice her years. Carlos, my anchor, had become head of therapist training, his calm presence shaping interns into professionals ready to thrive. Ellie, as always, steered operations with the precision of a surgeon, cutting through the administrative chaos most small practices drown beneath. On Friday mornings, our staff circles had grown crowded. Each voice, cleaners, managers, therapists, interns, still given time. One by one, challenges were shared, victories celebrated. Laughter rang in the break room, where exhaustion had once weighed like chains. More often than not, our Friday meetings ended in hugs or coffee runs, or inside jokes about whose patients brought the best baked goods. These, I thought silently each week, were the moments my childhood table had never offered me. They weren't my blood, but they were my family, and it showed. Our waiting list had expanded to nearly 8 weeks. Physician referrals poured in, many noting a particular reason: because your clinic treats patients like people. That one sentence summed up the philosophy my parents had never understood. Honor mattered more than charm. Precision counted more than photographs. Quiet persistence built more than empty words of pride. But with every brick I laid, every patient restored, every staff member lifted, my biological family only grew more frantic. When they could not control my world directly, they tried shaping how the world saw them. I first noticed it again on Bianca's Facebook. A photograph from my graduation day. Chelsea wearing my cap, my father's hands proudly adjusting its tassel. The caption read, "So blessed to raise 2 brilliant daughters." We've always been a family that values hard work in healthcare and community. Hard work, healthcare, words. She had never so much as muttered during my years curled over ramen and spreadsheets at 2 a.m. Within days, neighbors and friends congratulated her on family legacy. Church acquaintances praised their decades of sacrifice. And though I hadn't spoken to her in months, my inbox overflowed with confused messages from colleagues asking which Marlowe actually steered the business. I silenced my reply, resisting the temptation for fire. Silence, I reminded myself, became strength, too. I'd already set my professional boundaries in stone. If they wanted to parade illusions online, it would crumble eventually the way cheap plaster always does. It didn't take long. One afternoon, Ellie breezed into my office with her practical smirk. "Do you know what Dr. Reynolds asked me yesterday?" she said, dropping into my chair like she'd owned it all her life. I shook my head. "He asked how much control your parents still hold over the clinic, then laughed." Her smirk widened, and said he knows the answer is 0. Apparently they've been making noise about it at his country club. My jaw tightened, but Ellie only chuckled. "Relax, he finds it pathetic. He said he appreciates you precisely because you don't drop family names or brag about legacy." She tapped the wall, directly at the original framed license now set beneath our expansion blueprints. "He said you built a business, not a monument to your last name. That's why he trusts you." For a few heartbeats, I forgot how to breathe. That evening, I stayed late at the clinic, wandering the halls like a ghost through my own success. From each room, faint scents lingered. Menthol cream, sweat earned in rehabilitation, the metallic tang of exercise machinery. These were the scents of my life, not the perfume of my mother's faked tears. Through the glass walls, I watched Meredith coaching an elderly patient through a simple stair climb, her voice gentle but unrelenting. "One more. You're strong enough." And when the woman reached the top step and wept, Meredith wrapped her in a hug. That was what my family had never understood. Healing was never about appearances. It was about being present, steady, and unignorable. But their desperation only deepened as mine solidified. Soon the gestures escalated beyond social media. One afternoon, Carol slipped into my office with a carefully folded piece of paper. "Bianca stopped by today," she explained softly. "Said she wanted to leave this for you." Handwriting filled the page in delicate ink. "My darling daughter, I miss you. I want to heal these wounds. Please come for dinner. Let us mend. Just us, at home." I folded it quietly and slid it into the drawer where I had begun archiving each attempt. Not out of cruelty, but for evidence. Because for every handwritten plea, there was another, more calculated approach. 2 days later came a courier-delivered letter on my father's law firm's letterhead. "Proposal, family mediation." His words were dressed in professionalism, but beneath the ink bled the same demand as always: control, even under the guise of reconciliation. I laughed bitterly when I set it down. For years, they ignored my voice. Now they wanted an attorney's gavel to force its silence. But the truth was simple. This family had already judged me, again and again, and I had already sentenced myself free. The following month, my phone pinged with another message, this time from Chelsea. "Miss you, big sis. Can we talk? Just us?" The tone stung with nostalgia, but I could see beneath it the familiar ploy, softened around edges now grown sharper with loss. I saved the message but didn't reply. And yet, while their maneuvers grew noisy, my own circles grew quiet, steady, strong. 2 interns joined our mentorship program, a pro bono initiative launched for uninsured community members. 15% of our services reserved without apology. Awards came in anonymously, plaques recognizing outstanding local healthcare provider and community commitment in medicine. We hung none of them higher than the old license by the door. Every Friday morning, while coffee brewed and staff stretched around crowded circle chairs, I looked at each face in turn and thought, this is what family looks like. Here, voices carried weight. Support wasn't conditional. Boundaries were respected. No one came to the circle hoping to hijack glory. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted inside me. Where once I carried resentment heavy as lead, I carried instead a sense of quiet gratitude for my patience, my staff, my freedom, for building in shadows where no one expected me to stand. Some nights, when I lingered after closing, gazing out across the buzzing city skyline, I no longer thought of Victor's disappointment, or Bianca's dismissal, or Chelsea's envy. I thought only of the hands I steadied on treatment tables, the teams that rallied until midnight, the boundaries I had finally learned to draw, because underneath all their noise, the truth was simple. They had already lost, and I had already won. By the time autumn's air turned crisp and the trees along Brookhaven streets blazed in hues of copper and fire, their voices had grown louder again, not in my home or my clinic, but in the spaces around me where their reach had always thrived. Reputation, perception, appearances. It was no longer about contracts or business shares. It became about rewriting the story. One morning, Ellie walked into my office with her brow furrowed and a manila envelope clutched in her hand. "You'll want to see this," she said, the edge in her voice warning me before I even opened it. Inside were clippings from the neighborhood newsletter, circulated by the homeowners association my parents belonged to. Smiling headshots of Victor and Bianca graced the Community Spotlight column. Beneath a headline that made my lungs seize, "The Marlowe Family, Generations of Healing Hands in Brookhaven." I scanned the lines as if each were jagged glass. The piece lauded their family tradition in healthcare, celebrating daughter Lena's contributions as a physical therapist, bolstered by the enduring support and pride of her loving parents and younger sister Chelsea. Photographs showed Chelsea with her bright, artificial smile, standing in front of my clinic's building, uncaptioned, but positioned to imply ownership. It was a carefully crafted fable, an alternate history where they were the architects, my clinic their legacy. Bile rose like acid as I clenched the paper in my hand. "They're erasing me," I muttered. "No," Ellie corrected sharply, a fire beneath her calm. "They're erasing the truth. But lies crumble when the foundation is weak. Would you like me to draft a correction?" I shook my head, steadying myself with a breath. "No, that plays into their hand. They want attention, conflict, spectacle. What they don't know is that silence can be a wall too." Ellie studied me, then nodded slowly. She understood, but the manipulation didn't stop there. At the annual charity gala for Atlanta Healthcare Initiatives, I found myself cornered by acquaintances my parents had spoken to in private. One after another approached me with the same polished phrasing. "Your parents are so proud. It's incredible how you've all built your clinic together." Each time I smiled tightly, corrected politely. "My clinic, my team." And each time, they reacted with the stunned surprise of people realizing a curtain had been jerked back and the stage was empty. Later that night, Leah, my closest friend and a leader in our professional women's support group, pulled me aside with a glass of champagne in hand. "Your parents are making noise," she said plainly. "Not everyone buys it, but some do. And you need to decide if you'll let their fantasy go unchecked." I dreaded the truth in her words. Silence bred strength, yes, but unchecked noise could crystallize into myth if it echoed long enough. The days after the gala felt like quicksand. I'd walk through the clinic and overhear whispers of patients repeating stories they'd read online. I'd glance at my inbox and find half a dozen inquiries that began with, "My friend told me your family practice." Family practice. 2 words that felt like thorns driven beneath my nails. One evening, Carol appeared at my office door again, a softness in her eyes I had learned often preceded bad news. "Your mother was here this afternoon," she said hesitantly. "She tried to leave another letter. This one was different." She handed it to me, sealed in cream-colored stationery. I stared at it for long minutes before breaking the wax. "Lena, we've always wanted to stand beside you, but you keep shutting doors. I understand you feel hurt, but to the world, family is what gives a business legitimacy. People recognize Marlowe because of your father and me. That name, our name, is the cornerstone. Please stop denying us. Let us stand publicly with you. It looks bad if we're separated." I crumpled the letter in my fist, heat rising to my face. Legitimacy, recognition, always woven as if I were the one indebted to them, as if their silence during my hardest years had somehow transmuted into a legacy worth leveraging. But that phrase seared me most. It looks bad if we're separated. It wasn't my reputation they feared. It was their own. I stared hard at the drawer of my desk, the one already stuffed with their prior pleas and demands. Papers lay stacked in meticulous order, half manipulation, half threats. Each one proof that no matter how high I climbed, they would prefer illusion over truth. It was that night, sitting alone in the glow of the desk lamp, while the clinic room slept behind me, that I began drafting my firmest statement yet, one that wouldn't be hidden in my drawers or whispered over coffee, one that would live publicly. I didn't use flowery words. No venom, no fire, just clarity, carved from steel. Marlowe Athletic Recovery is not, nor has it ever been, a family enterprise. It is a practice built by myself and sustained solely through the dedication of my staff. No family member holds partnership or employment at this clinic. All public statements to the contrary misrepresent my work, my team, and my patients. While I maintain hope for personal reconciliation with my family, professional boundaries remain absolute. When I finished typing, I stared at the lines, hands trembling over the keyboard. It wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration of independence. Before posting it to the clinic's website and professional LinkedIn page, I paused, the cursor blinking like a metronome of doubt. Would this ignite another wave of their retaliation? Would it fracture things further beyond repair? Then I realized, what was left to fracture? They'd already burned every bridge into ash. The only structure left standing was the one I'd built. I pressed publish. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Texts, emails, comments from patients and colleagues poured in. Not criticism, not disbelief, but support. Respect for your honesty, Dr. Marlowe. Love that you protect your team. Proud to be your patient. For the first time in my life, the truth outweighed their illusions, and it wasn't drowned. It rang. My phone buzzed another hour later. A text from Chelsea. So dramatic. "Everyone thinks you're cruel. You'll regret humiliating us like this." I set it down without replying. I had spent enough energy in the theater of their spiraling, yet beneath her venom I could hear the fear. They were losing the only power they had left. The story, and I, finally, had claimed mine. That night in bed, staring at the ceiling in the quiet of my apartment, I thought of the years I'd begged silently, through good grades, through long shifts, through invisible sacrifices, for them to see me, for them to celebrate me, to acknowledge me. And now that their spotlight had vanished, now that I had wrested it away, the truth settled heavier but lighter at once. I no longer cared if they saw me, because the world finally did. My patients, my staff, my community. For the first time, I didn't just feel free. I felt known. 1 year later, I stood in the quiet of my office, back straight, hands resting lightly on the frame of the large glass window overlooking the city. Atlanta stretched out like a tapestry of steel and light, restless in its movement. Yet inside the clinic, calm pulsed steady as a heartbeat. Beyond the glass wall of my corner space, I could see the hum of the treatment floor. 15 therapists moving with practiced rhythm. Meredith guiding Mrs. Hoffman, post-stroke, through careful seated exercises. Carlos standing steady beside a college basketball player rehabbing a torn ACL. Ellie laughing at the front desk with a patient whose recovery had taken twice as long as expected. The kind of victory laughter born only after tears. This was my view now. Not my parents' faces, demanding smiles at a dinner table. not Chelsea's restless envy gleaming in her eyes. Just this: rooms of people supported, voices respected, boundaries intact. My desk itself remained simple. No mahogany, no ostentation, a second-hand chair, a plain wooden surface, a couple of patient thank you cards framed on the wall where others might hang gilded degrees. My pride had never lived in appearances. The empire I had built lay in results. The scholarship fund had become more than a small gesture. It was expanding. This upcoming semester, 4 students would receive their tuition assistance. The mentorship program thrived. Each new graduate I trained repeated that invaluable phrase back to me eventually. Boundaries aren't selfish, they're survival. Hearing those words echoed out of another young therapist's mouth for the first time nearly made me weep. I had built something stronger than a clinic. I was building legacy. It was the kind Chelsea had always wanted to inherit, but what she never learned was that legacy isn't given. It's earned, and yet my biological family still circled, smaller each time, powerless in ways they hadn't yet realized. My mother continued the occasional letters, though they had grown less frequent, less grandiose. More fragile ones now? Photos of her gardening. Notes about volunteering. Tiny attempts at connection that no longer dripped demands. I couldn't decide yet if I would answer, but at least, for once, her words came empty of greed. My father had quieted almost entirely, retreating from his campaigns. Perhaps even Victor Marlowe had at last realized there was no leveraging of a daughter uninterested in being his investment. And Chelsea, her messages remained sporadic, angry, then contrite, pleading, then bitter. But the rhythm was quieting too. Months would go by without a word, and somewhere in the deep pause of her silence, I detected a truth sharper than any attack. Even she had recognized the wall I built would not crumble. What lingered wasn't hatred anymore, not bitterness, not even longing. It was peace. For the first time in my adult life, when I thought of them, my chest didn't ache. It simply remained still. On one of those golden afternoons, as I watched the team across the treatment floor, Meredith pushed through the glass doors of my office holding a clipboard. "Dr. Marlowe, your 3 o'clock is here. Mrs. Abernathy?" It's her final session. I smiled. Perfect timing. In the room, the elderly woman's eyes shone bright. "There's my miracle worker," she teased. "The miracle was all you," I said, guiding her through steady stretches. She laughed, reminding me of her grandson's words. He called her progress the best research paper he'd ever witnessed. Later, after she hugged me goodbye, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror against the wall. My posture was different than a year ago, relaxed, taller. I wasn't standing out of defiance anymore. I was simply, fully standing in myself. That evening, at Leah's monthly dinner, surrounded by my professional women's circle, Melissa lifted her glass once again. "To Lena," she beamed, "who showed us that protecting yourself is the foundation of helping others, who built impossible things louder than any family's doubt." Glasses clinked. Laughter warmed the space. These women weren't just colleagues anymore. They were chosen family as well. Every note of their voices confirmed I was no longer invisible. Later, stepping onto Leah's porch, the evening mountains turned violet against sunset, as steady and immovable as the lines I'd drawn. I whispered softly to no one but the horizon, "I am Dr. Lena Marlowe. I heal people who see me, and I will never settle for less again." And for the first time in my life, those words did not feel like rebellion. They felt like home. And there we end Lena's journey, from invisibility under her family's weight, to the strength of boundaries, and finally to peace in a legacy she built herself. Now I want to hear from you which country you are watching from. Drop it down in the comments. I'd love to know how far Lena's story has traveled. And if you enjoyed listening to this story, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps bring more powerful stories like this to life. Stay strong, protect your worth, and I'll see you in the next story.